Hi, everyone. Welcome to our December Leadership Webinar by iNACOL. I'd like to invite you to click on the little star or the happy face in the little menus right next to the whiteboard to the left and show us where you live. Great, so I see we've got people here from Idaho, Ohio, North Carolina, California, Virginia. Looks like everybody here is from the United States somewhere. Nobody's saying, hey, you don't have my country on here. Well, welcome, and we're glad you're all here. So our webinar today is entitled Quality Indicators for Online and Blended Learning, Accreditation, and More. And we're happy to have with us today Dave Edwards, who is our Director of Quality for iNACOL, and he'll share a little bit about what that means in just a second. And then also Dana Van Dynes from AdvancED, who is focusing on online and blended learning accreditation. And so we're thrilled to have both of you on here. So at this point, I'm going to turn the mic and the presentation over to you two.
Thank you, Rob, and welcome everybody to this leadership webinar. Hope you find this very informative. For those of you that were at the Virtual School Symposium in New Orleans, this will be a little bit of rehash of the quality indicators, but I'll be focusing on kind of how that's beginning to mesh into states and what our challenges are for implementation into some of the pilot states. I'm happy to have Dana Van Dynes presenting today about how we're looking at common language across quality from a practitioner standpoint as well as from the accreditation standpoint. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and get started. The overview today, really we're going to touch on four important areas. Number one, I'll give a little bit of the national perspective on quality assurance and a lot of the work that we have seen at iNACOL from looking at the gaps in quality assurance. And then second, I'll talk a little bit about the iNACOL report findings, the report that was released in October at the Virtual School Symposium. And then look at implications for the multiple indicators that were addressed in the report. And then Dana will be talking about accreditation standards for online, and then how quality indicators and accreditation are coming together to shape true quality assurance in online learning. And as you see, if you do have questions along the way, please feel free to type them in the chat, and Dana and I will try to respond to those as quickly as possible. So when we look at online learning, really there's this imbalance nationally. And with ESEA reauthorization, No Child Left Behind, the accountability and policy frameworks just do not align very well to the continued growth of online learning. And that growth is surpassing the accountability and policy frameworks. And that really prompted the Gates Foundation to ask iNACOL to look at quality assurance from an student outcomes perspective versus just the inputs and the outputs. And that is why we issued the report. So what we really saw from a national landscape is that if you have looked at the news, the Washington Post, the New York Times, a lot of the information coming out of Colorado and some of the other states with full-time virtual programs, we are seeing more and more negativity and critics in the field, and that has prompted more and more legislators to really push the requirements for demonstrating quality. Another one is a lot of schools and especially full-time programs, there's a huge need for a demonstration of return on investment for online and blended learning. And of course, the biggest one are the perception issues around online learning and the policies that hinder student options, and we've seen quite a few of those, and I'll talk a little bit about some of those implications. Performance-based funding trends, there are a handful of states that are really pushing forward with performance-based funding models. As a matter of fact, iNACOL was just granted some funds from the Gates Foundation to look at building a true performance-based model and implementing that in some of the pilot states. So we really see that performance-based funding trends are going to require better measures of success. And then we've seen a lack of consistent measurement criteria across states. We're not measuring at all grades. We're only measuring certain subjects. We're not looking at growth from the individual student perspective. Some states are doing a very good job at that, but a majority of the states are not, and they're looking at cohort graduation rates. They're looking at cohort growth versus individual student. There's also a lack of data for online learning. Getting that data into the authorizer's hands or into state legislators' hands to really look at how well online learners are performing. And of course, I've already talked about current funding formulas. A lot of them are still based on seat time. So what is the vision for online quality from iNACOL's perspective? Primarily, quality has been focused on the inputs, the teachers, the content, the instructional models. It's also been focused on the assessments, and now with Common Core assessments, and then growth models. So all of that has kind of been from an inputs and outputs perspective. Really, we see all of that coming together and taking all of this into a 360 evaluation approach and looking at outcomes-based effectiveness and more focus on individual students and individual student growth. And of course, accreditation really sets the tone for, how do we measure this? What are we looking for to truly prove quality in online learning? And Dana will be talking about what those standards are. The iNACOL report came out in October, measuring quality from inputs to outcomes, and there were 5 indicators that came out of a lot of the focus groups that we worked with. And we worked with providers, we worked with full-time state programs, we worked with full-time charter programs, charter authorizers, as well as some of the legislators. And these were the top 5 indicators that we feel need to be measured in some form or fashion in order to truly look at quality from an outcomes perspective. The first one being proficiency, the second being growth, and really that at an individual student growth, looking at how much a student grows within a period. Graduation rate, there are a lot of different ways that graduation rate is calculated, coming up with a standard formula for how we truly measure graduation rate. And then 2 that are very elusive in gathering data, and that's college and career readiness and closing the achievement gap. And how do we truly measure if full-time online programs are doing that, or if supplemental programs are providing students with the ability to advance in career, to advance in their college and career readiness, and more importantly, closing the achievement gap between the different subgroups. So those were the 5 indicators. So then we began to look at what are the implications for states and for programs if they're going to truly measure the multiple indicators and measure multiple data sets. Well, first and foremost, the ability to measure mastery across multiple subjects and grades is necessary. How do we begin to build assessment systems and gather the data to measure other subjects other than the core subjects that are being tested now? We need the ability to assess at-risk, overage, and undercredited students. A lot of those are going into your full-time online programs. And how do we take a student that's 3 years, maybe 3 years behind in their learning, and even though they don't reach proficiency at the end of that year, how do we demonstrate that they grew during that year as an indicator of potential success? We also need the ability to measure students advancing ahead of the traditional calendar. And a lot of the accountability systems, the softwares, the data collections do not allow states or programs to measure that. So what do we need? We need a system that captures individual growth better to measure online learning, looking at individual student growth, an individual student dashboard of some fashion. We need a system that looks at growth over time in conjunction with proficiency, not just taking proficiency as the indicator of a successful outcome, but looking at proficiency along with growth, individual student growth, and the other multiple indicators we've looked at. And graduation rate needs to account for the mobility, extended time, students that need additional time to graduate, or they're very mobile. They're coming in and out of online programs. How do we take into account and report that data, that mobility within our current data systems? Maybe we have to build new data systems. But these are all the implications that we have seen, and as we move forward, we're going to be looking at 3 to 4 pilot states and looking at how we implement these multiple indicators for success. Individual student performance should be measured and reported transparently based on standards. That is pretty much a non-negotiable that we have seen coming out of the sessions that we had with our focus groups. The growth model should be based on the growth of the individual, not on cohorts. And then probably one of the most difficult and potentially costly ones, untested subjects and grade levels must be assessed with some type of validating assessments that measure both proficiency and growth. So those are the 3 biggest implications for implementation of these of the multiple measures. So with that said, I'm going to now turn it over to Dana Van Dynes with AdvancED to talk about how accreditation standards play into quality assurance. Dana?
Hey, good afternoon. Dave, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, perfect. I had some little timeout thing happen. So thanks for having me this afternoon. I want to take a few minutes. I'll just introduce myself. Here in the Tempe office, I work with AdvancED as the Director of Distance Education Accreditation. And if you're not familiar with AdvancED, we represent NCA, CAFE, SACS-CAFE, and Northwest regional accreditation agencies, where we credit more than 30,000 schools in over 70 countries across the globe. I recently joined the AdvancED team after running a virtual school here in the state of Arizona for the last 6 years. And I've been tasked with writing and rolling out the standards for quality digital learning institutions. And today we accredit more than 300 online schools across the world. So today I'd like to take a few minutes, and as you can see on your screen, I'd like to just touch on talking about the accreditation standards and how they're applied in the digital learning environment for both comprehensive schools, which many of you are working at, and supplementary schools if you provide credit recovery or other types of programs for students. Talk a little bit about the emphasis on professional practice in digital education, how that comes into play in our new standards and what that means for quality metrics in online schools. And then talk about the specific standards and themes throughout the process, and talk about some of the tools that we're providing here through the accreditation process for schools that will help them improve the outcomes-based results that Dave is referring to. So just to take a minute and kind of review the professional practice of digital education. We refer to this as best practices oftentimes. And when we went to do our research and have looked at what are the practices that are allowing us to reach those, have those outcomes in our online schools, these were kind of the areas of professional practice that we're looking at. So when we're looking at student accountability, we're defining the requirements for attendance and logins and course completion, deadlines that students must meet for course success, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. Differentiated instruction. How are we providing remediation or enrichment to personalize learning and meet the needs of our individual students in digital education? And in teacher expectations, we expect that a qualified teacher is monitoring student progress, providing feedback, and personalizing those instructional strategies for students so that we can meet their needs. And again, talking about learning outcomes today, what are the benchmarks, the performance results that demonstrate learning outcomes? We're looking for plans for students who are not demonstrating success in the digital learning environment. How are we working with those students? Other practices about the digital learning environment. What is the technology infrastructure like for students? Is it easy to access, easy to navigate? What type of an orientation do students have to online learning to help them be more successful? What type of strategies are we using with our students? And then looking overall at the communication and media tools that support online learning. So our digital learning standards are going to address multiple research-based practices throughout the process. So within the standards, what I'd like to do is just focus today on what the quality indicators are. And within all of our accreditation protocols here at AdvancED, we have 6 themes that we use throughout to measure quality online learning. So we're going to start with looking at equity. And so what does that mean for students? You can ask a lot of questions, I guess. What expectations have we set for students to give them opportunities to come into online learning? What skills do we expect them to learn? Is the media rich? And all of this comes into play when we're looking at digital literacy. In order to even become a student in our environment, what are our expectations? What do we expect the student to know, and what do we expect them to learn when it comes to using technology in their world? Part of this equity piece is how do we teach our kids to analyze and apply and create? So more than just a multiple choice assessment or maybe a one-on-one dialogue, what are we teaching our kids to do and master with these technologies, providing all students access to these lessons, allowing them to problem solve and create solutions to solve our local and global issues. So online learning is going to bring equity in many cases, offering students a chance to study subjects that they might not have available to them, and also have access to highly qualified teachers as well that they might not have access to where they are currently attending school. So equity is a theme you'll see throughout quality standards. Stakeholder involvement is another area where we take a look at how do we have teachers, parents, students, community partners involved in the educational process for our students. So quality online schools will involve the stakeholders in these processes. Teachers are held to high expectations with regard to communication with their students. Often there's daily office hours and weekly expectations for phone calls. Emails and synchronous sessions often leave the students feeling a lot more connected and supported to the teachers than maybe they've experienced in a more traditional setting. Stakeholder involvement for parents. We often expect our parents in the online environment to assist in the mentoring and coaching of their children. So what kind of a program is set up for that to happen? This provides, or there should be access to immediate grades and progress that can also support the student success. And then many online schools have community partners, such as local community colleges and universities. And these partnerships will allow students to earn college credit while they're attending high school. Students can offer work through CTE programs, and I know there's many organizations that provide volunteer hours through organizations like Kiwanis that offer key clubs and builder clubs to our students in the virtual environment. So online learning provides greater flexibility and often more time to gain these types of experiences for our students. So you can look at a variety of ways that stakeholder involvement becomes a quality indicator in our online schools. Another theme I want to talk about, and at the core of accreditation really, is continuous improvement. The school establishes goals that are tied to academic performance. These are often tied to standards and state and national assessments that are used as benchmarks. Some of those things that are referenced in the quality indicator report that Dave referred to provide some suggested practices. So just like traditional education systems, online schools will take time to annually assess the data that will identify the trends and the results of their students. So using the stakeholder feedback and using student performance data, the school will set goals that will drive increased student achievement. And then communicating these goals to all stakeholders. The school can set metrics for staff members, for students, regarding expectations for the student learning outcomes. And then establishing those outcomes and communicating those will greatly enhance the progress towards meeting those established goals. Within our accreditation protocol, AdvancED requires the student performance to be documented on a diagnostic, and assessments are rated for quality, and the results are also rated for improvement in student achievement. So we take that data and we look at how is student achievement increasing and improving in the educational entity when we look at your accreditation recommendation. Another area of quality, another theme, is personalization. The feedback from many virtual school students, if you talk to them, when you talk to them, is that they have more access to personalized attention in this online learning process. And this can be achieved in many ways. So often, many schools are now using a learning style inventory that can provide both the school team and the student information on how they best learn and help identify how they can best be successful in the online environment, identify what challenges they may have. And then the teaching and learning can be personalized to match that learning style for the student. Many of the online teachers have the ability to provide for project-based learning for students that can tie to their particular interests or learning style, and allows flexibility in designing these learning outcomes so that the educational experience can be personalized. Despite online learning experiences often, because the students are at home or in a computer lab, yet many of the online schools are providing opportunities for socialization, which helps personalize that feeling of attending a school. And so there are government set up, student governments, clubs, local events encouraged to help continue that development of the social skills for students. Resources can be developed and offered by counselors and advisors if students are looking for local sports teams or music or dance classes. So socialization also can help personalize that experience for online students, and it can take on many forms. Another theme that we use in accreditation is looking at engagement. How is student engagement monitored, and what expectations are set for a student, often during the enrollment period? How often is the student expected to log into class? How is adequate progress measured? The expectations that you have for students should then drive the attendance system so that school staff and parents can review progress on a regular basis. Accountability practices need to be in place for students so they know the consequences right up front for not keeping up or attending the online courses. Often student motivation can be a challenge, and so we look at all of those practices. What processes are in place for students not being successful? And typically there are some counseling services, advising services that can help re-engage students. And so we look at all of those practices with regard to how engaged the students are in their learning. Another quality theme is collaboration. And that's a key component that leads to increased outcomes in an online school. Ensuring that all stakeholders have opportunities to collaborate When stakeholders are in contact, students are held more accountable. Not listed by another key element of collaboration that I don't have listed up here, I guess at the bottom would be, or even to start would be the teacher-to-teacher collaboration. So you've got your students talking to teachers, your students talking to other students, and your teachers and parents talking, and obviously providing professional learning communities for your teachers in this digital learning environment can really have a great impact on student achievement. When teachers are reviewing the student data and implementing the strategies to increase results across the curriculum, these outcomes and the student growth models that we've referred to earlier can really occur at a rapid pace when everyone's working together and collaborating. I've heard many school leaders make statements related to the fact that maybe they can't do some of this collaboration because they're an online school. And we feel quite differently that in many times the collaboration can be greater because today's technology is allowing us many different types of options to have that interaction between students, teachers, and parents. So those are the 6 themes that we use to measure quality, and I'll just take a minute if you've not worked with AdvancED and don't currently have regional accreditation. These are the 5 standards that we base our protocol and our accreditation recommendation on. We look at the purpose and direction of a school. We look at a school and we look at having solid governance and leadership practices. Within each of these 5 standards, there are indicators that are related to those themes that I referred to today. We look for sufficient resource and support systems and a process that takes all of these results tied back to teaching and assessing for learning and progresses the school in a way to increase and keep improving as an educational institution. And while many online schools have really focused on inputs for many years, and I was part of those systems, we really worked on getting those things and those items in place, and we've got some outcomes. It's really exciting for me to be participating in a place where now we are starting to develop those accountability systems that can really demonstrate the quality learning and teaching that is going on in our virtual schools. So overall, the accredited digital learning institutions are these 3 components. We meet the quality standards. The school will take themselves through an internal review, we call it, to meet all of the quality indicators and rate their performance in all of those areas. We also include the student performance diagnostic, which, like I said, is rating the assessment tools and rating the assessment results for students. And then we also require that the school solicit feedback through research-based surveys that they'll send through our accreditation management system. And so those 3 pieces really are at the core of what drive the quality in our schools and working towards continuous improvement that are going to ensure success for our students. I've put my information up here today, so if you have additional information or questions more specific that we don't cover today regarding accreditation, I'd be happy to answer those questions. And then just to let you know, as we roll out our digital learning standards in February of 2013, I do have a couple conferences posted on our website where we will go into an in-depth 2-day training on the accreditation model. And Dave, with that kind of is my piece. I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Dana. And as you can see, I post this graphic up there so that you get a good global perspective of how quality and accreditation really are folded together. Really, you look at course design standards, teaching standards, then this idea of multiple measures for accountability, and then wrap the accreditation standards into that, where you're looking at both inputs and outputs and now outcomes being part of the accreditation process. You really can see that there is a huge focus on quality assurance in online learning, and we need your help to continue to advance the field from a policy barrier perspective, learning what are the policies and the barriers that will that will challenge us in implementation of both the accreditation standards as well as the quality assurance metrics. So with that, I turn it back over to Rob. Here is my contact information as well, but I turn it back over to Rob, and we'll open it up for questions.
Thanks, Dave and Dana. I want to thank you for your input there, and hopefully everybody else on the webinar has found that important and useful. So this gives you an opportunity now to ask any of those burning questions about either quality or accreditation with Dana or with Dave. So you can either type them in the chat room, or you can click on the talk button right below my picture and ask your question. So I'll open that up and see what else is on people's minds regarding these topics. So Wendy asks, she says, we've recently adopted a new learning management system that is iNACOL approved. Are there systems that you promote in particular? So I'll let Dave respond in just a second, but let me just first say that iNACOL does not approve any system, and we do not necessarily promote any system in general. As our CEO, Susan Patrick, likes to say, we are the Sweden of online and blended learning. So if somehow you thought we approved certain systems, we don't really do that. There are systems that are members of our organization, but we don't do accrediting, we don't do, we don't teach courses. We simply share the information with our members and that sort of thing. So Dave, do you want to add on to that?
Sure, and thank you, Rob. Yeah, iNACOL definitely is platform agnostic. I think compliant with the quality standards that are posted on our website probably would be the best approach. As far as specifics with the LMS, we do not promote any LMSs from a company perspective. Again, if they meet the criteria of the ability to gather the data from multiple indicators, and we're working with vendors, and we're going to be working with state authorizing agencies as well, so that when states begin to look at doing RFPs for LMSs, that they are including the language around multiple indicators, the ability to gather the multiple assessment data, as well as the ability to give that information, provide information from the school's perspective that can help in the accreditation standards as well. So that's really our focus is more on helping shape the language around RFPs and making sure that they are compliant with the quality assurance.
So I would add to that the standards are developed, and then how people use those standards is really up to you. And Dana, do you want to talk a little bit about how you, in the accrediting world, have used those standards a little bit?
Absolutely. When I was a practitioner, I guess years ago, when I first started as a school administrator in online learning, iNACOL was the place that I went to really develop the evaluation systems and the quality metrics for the school that I was part of. And so knowing that and doing lots of research out there with just quality standards, that not only with iNACOL but other organizations, we've taken all of that research and practices that we know work, and we've really put them together with our new digital learning standards that become something that are applicable to what we do in our schools, and they measure the inputs and outputs as we need them to that are related to what we do in the online environment.
Dana, could you talk a little bit about, and maybe you mentioned this and I just missed it, how you decided to use the term digital learning standards rather than anything else?
Well, I'll tell you, that has been an interesting decision, but I think it's one because the terminology is changing so rapidly and technology is changing rapidly, and not all of our schools, because we want our standards to apply to both online, but we also want them to apply to schools that have hybrid models, which we know that that's a popular trend, direction that we're going. So we use the word digital, meaning that there's some type of electronic media involved in learning. So you know, sometimes it's a matter of a computer lab, but in many times it's resources and things that are available to students through smartphones and other computer resources. So the word digital learning really encompasses everything that we do in a virtual world and online, and there's not one term that really seems to be used out there consistently. We use all those terms back and forth. So AdvancED settled on digital learning, and we think that applies in both traditional and non-traditional education settings.
So I'm just curious of the people who are attending here, how many of you, in fact, why don't we do a little poll here. So if you have already gone through the accreditation process for your online or blended or digital school, would you choose the green check? If you've not gone through it, would you do the red X? So for those of you who've gone through the process, what might be some things? All right, so Lily asked an important question in the chat room, so Dana will let you take that one. And then it would be great to hear from those who've gone through the process what you might recommend to schools that have not gone through the process and what to be prepared for. So Dana, why don't you answer that question, and then hopefully some of you experienced accreditation schools can share some thoughts with us in general and with the other schools that are on this call.
Thanks, Rob. And I do want, that's a great question, Lily. Thank you. AdvancED has not had accreditation standards specifically written for digital learning institutions. So we are rolling out new standards in February, and they will go into effect beginning next July. For our schools that go through accreditation in 2013 and 14. For our schools that are currently in the process, and in the past years, we've always used our quality school standards. So if you're looking at our website right now, you still will not find the digital learning standards. They're going to be available after the new year. We'll be putting some of our resources up there and start training our schools. And especially those of you that are interested in going through the process, I'd encourage you to hold off till right after the new year and hopefully attend our conference or get in touch with me so that we can link you up to the digital learning institution standards.
All right, good input there. So those schools that have already been through accreditation, is there anything you'd like to share with other schools as they prepare to go in that direction and go through that process?
Yeah, Lisa, that's a great point. Typically, when you go through accreditation, you really reinforce the quality that you've got going on in your educational entity, and it really helps bring together, your team and identify your strengths and opportunities for improvement, especially looking at the student diagnostics and where we are with accountability. It's really nice that we're all kind of in the same place right now, looking at what are the outcomes, how are our students being successful, and what else do we need to do as an online community to make sure that our students experience success. There's a question, I see Dr. Beadle asked a question about the corporation standards and the digital learning standards. We do have standards for corporations, and those are educational corporations that are in the business of education, and they may be operating more than just a school or two. They may have an arm of their organization where they're creating online curriculum or providing online technologies, and not necessarily even online. I work mostly in the virtual space and digital learning space. So we do, if you're interested in looking at corporate accreditation, that's also a model that we have, and I'd be happy to follow up with you and talk about that in more detail. It looks like there's another question about Rhonda attended a digital conference last year that may have been for our distance education schools, and it would have been using the school standards. So the new conference and moving forward, we'll be training specifically on how to use the digital learning standards within your institution. So it will be very different, and our protocol has changed this year for all of our schools and corporations. So everyone is now using a new protocol that's more data focused, and that includes the stakeholder feedback piece as well.
So Dave Edwards asked this question, so I just changed the option from a yes-no answer to a scale from 1 to 5. So he asked the question, for those of you in schools, on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being very feasible, 5 not feasible at all, how feasible will implementing multiple data factors, indicators, be for your school or organization? So in place of that green check, if you put an A would indicate very feasible, feasible, and an E would be not feasible for implementing multiple data indicators for your school. So if you take a minute to indicate that, that would be great. Again, A, very feasible to use multiple data indicators for your school, and E would be not feasible, and anything in between. And Dave, you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. One of the things that, one of the barriers that we see is, again, it goes back to the very first slide I showed, the imbalance between current accountability systems and the growth of online learning, and the ability for data systems, assessment systems, and just overall policy and guidelines to look at multiple indicators, not just proficiency, not just cohort growth, but looking at all of those in total. And are we collecting data to report out on subject areas that are not being tested? The cost and the logistics of implementing that, we realize, may become a barrier. And then how do we begin to build capacity in states and schools to do that? And it looks like the feedback is leaning a little bit towards there's some feasibility there. We still have some work to do with policy barriers, but there's still, that we couple 1C and 1D. So the feasibility is going to be difficult in some states with some authorizers just because of policy and guidelines. And that's a good point here in the chat. Being a supplemental school, you don't always have access to the data, and I appreciate you clarifying that. That is one thing that we're pushing on states and pushing on vendors, is to be able to provide that data so that states and authorizers and programs, even supplemental schools and programs, have data where they can report multiple indicators. So I would definitely like to chat with you more about, what are the data sets that are missing, and where are the critical pieces that that you need to have in order to truly take a good snapshot of quality, and what are the policies and guidelines that we can help build for that. So I appreciate your clarification on that.
And just to piggyback on that, Dave and Lisa, with your question, is AdvancED also, in our student diagnostic, when we're working with a school for accreditation and they are a supplementary school, we also we still look for what assessment data do you have, how do we measure student growth and student learning in that supplementary school. And as you mentioned, Lisa, sometimes having some of that data is challenging. So it's exciting that we're progressing towards a place where we might all have more information about our students.
And I just posted the link to the report that was released. If you don't have that yet, there's a rubric in there, a basic rubric that asks some questions around, how to begin to look at multiple indicators and multiple assessments, and what that would look like from an implementation perspective.
So Dana, if you click on the Moderators tab, oh, you can't see this. Oh, or maybe you can. Click on the Moderators tab. There's a good question there about, well, let me just read it out loud for everyone. So the question is this, that their entire district is beginning the accreditation process, and her virtual school is part of the district. Will there be digital standards just for her school, or are those digital standards expected to be followed across all the district? How do you handle that as far as accreditation?
Well, that's a great question. Yeah, and within a district, many school districts are accredited under our systems and district models. So within that, we look specifically at each entity and classify them into one of our protocols. So in the case of a virtual school, if they're going to be going through that process beginning in the 13-14 school year, they would be using the digital learning standards specifically. And the other schools within a district that might be more of a traditional setting would still be using our quality school standards. If it's happening right now, most likely you're all using the quality school standards.
Other questions or comments by anybody here? Kind of along these same lines of accreditation, quality, and evaluation, we continue to hopefully provide quality webinars to you. So as we're finishing this up, if other questions come up, of course, we'll answer them. But if you feel like you have to move on or do something like that, if you wouldn't mind clicking on the link in the chat room and filling out the evaluation of this webinar, that would be great. And I'll give everybody another minute or two to see if there's other questions. Dana, question is, where are the other accreditation groups on this?
Where are the other accreditation, meaning the other regional accreditors, I'm assuming. And I'm not exactly, not familiar. I know at the iNACOL symposium in New Orleans that the WASC, the Western Accreditation Commission, that group was there, and they have addressed and done some things specifically to address the needs in virtual schools. Specifically what their protocol is, I'm not sure. And then the New England and the Middle States organization, because I'm still relatively new with the regional accreditors, I don't really know what they've done, but that's a great question, and hopefully we'll all be working together towards progressing quality in online learning.
All right, last chance for any other accreditation questions, quality questions. All right, well, I don't see any other clicks or anybody else typing, so I want to thank everybody for being here today. It's great to all work together towards the common goal of improving student achievement across the United States for all of our students. I want to especially thank Dave and Dana for sharing their expertise with us. If you'd like to join in my applause, you can click on the smiley face and click on applause to let you know that we want to thank them for all that they did in preparing all of this for us today. So we wish all of you a great holiday season from iNACOL, and we look forward to seeing you in the new year. So thanks, everybody. Have a great holiday, and see you in the new year.